One thing I do remember is it seemed like every year or whenever the vote came up, the citizens knew that it was costing the city money to run the trolley, but they still wanted it.
The year was 1919. The war to end all wars was over, and the doughboys were coming home. President Woodrow Wilson was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The ill-fated League of Nations was founded, and Prohibition became law. Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, was incorporated. Babe Ruth hit a record 29 home runs for the New York Yankees, and the Grand Canyon National Park was opened. While these monumental events were taking place, the city of Fort Collins, Colorado was making its own history with a decision that was not only cost-effective for its time, but ultimately far-reaching in its impact on the city's growth, and it all started in 1907.
The original trolley line was put in was the Denver and Interurban system, and the Denver and Interurban was incorporated in the summer of 1904, and they were a wholly owned subsidiary of the Colorado Southern Railroad, and their two systems they wanted to put in was an interurban line between Denver and Boulder and between Denver and Fort Collins, which would also serve Longmont and Loveland and so on. So in 1906 they received a franchise from the city of Fort Collins to put in a trolley line inside the city.
In 1907, the city of Fort Collins laid 9 miles of track, which included a line out to Lindenmeyer Lake. This line passed the sugar factory to Anderson Corner and north on what is now LeMay Avenue. Lindenmeyer Lake was a recreation area with a dance pavilion, rowboats, and a power boat that could be rented. It was reported that it also had a spooning trade where young couples could go and spoon by the lake during romantic encounters.
Between the cemetery and Sheldon Lake was a racetrack that was owned by the Gentlemen's Riding and Driving Club. Had a big grandstand, and they had these, mostly they were trotting races because gentlemen didn't sit on the back of the horse. It was for the cowboys and so on. And so they'd have the trotting races out there, and the D&I had agreed that they would have the line ready in the summer of 1907 because once a year they had what they called out then a cowboy tournament race meet out at what was called Prospect Park. Well, they weren't quite done with the line. The power plant wasn't in place, so they actually laid tracks across the courthouse lawn from Mason over to Mountain, and they ran a small steam train that pulled some cars. That's how they serviced the cowboy tournament race meet in the summer of 1907. And then the other loop, of course, went down College Avenue to just past the college down to Pitkin and then over, and then there was a loop that went over into onto Remington Street.
The next line went west on Mountain Avenue and went toward the cemetery. At the same time, the city was purchasing land around Sheldon Lake to develop a city park. On December 20th, 1907, 4 new streetcars arrived from Denver. Operations consisted of 3 cars running on 3 lines. All the cars would meet at the Y at Mountain and College every 20 minutes, then depart on a different line. After 3 trips, all cars traversed all routes every hour. Cars ran from 5 a.m. until midnight, serving most businesses in the city, plus students at Colorado A&M, now CSU, on College Avenue. The cost was 5 cents per ride. This fare would stick with the system throughout its life.
And they were the big double truck Wilbur cars manufactured in Denver by the Wilbur Manufacturing Company. And they required a motorman and a conductor.
But after only a few years, D&I cut back on service in Fort Collins by dropping the conductor function on each car. From then until 1951, the motorman assumed the additional task of collecting fare and issuing transfers.
The system was having financial troubles, and so they shut down. And for about a year, there was no trolley system for Fort Collins. They tried some little rail cars that looked like automobiles on flange wheels. Those really didn't serve it very well. So in 1919, they put it to a vote of the citizens of Fort Collins, and they voted then to convert over to the, buy the system and convert over to the Birnie cars.
The city would agree to pay $100,000 to revitalize it. The vote was 8-1 in favor of buying the system and junking the heavy Wilbur streetcars. The city quickly acquired the streetcar line from D&I and began upgrading it. 4 new streetcars were bought at a cost of $6,500 each.
May of 1919, they had ordered from the American Car Company in St. Louis, Missouri, the 4 Birnie safety cars, which was the new technology, the single truck, single person operation. All you needed was a motorman, no more conductor. They had safety features on them. They had the dead man control, where the motorman has to hold the controller down, and the theory being if something happened to the motorman, had a heart attack or something, and relieve the pressure. Though my picture always was if the motorman had a heart attack and died, he'd probably fall over on the thing and be holding it down. Yeah. I guess the idea was maybe he'd just drop off to the side, but you have to hold that down, otherwise once it's let up, then it automatically puts on the brakes and stops. And then it also has underneath, it has that gate and then the bench behind it. Mm-hmm. And if something hits that gate and trips it up, then that sets the brakes and it turns off the power and it's supposed to stop. So
20-minute schedules were adopted, and our beloved Car 21 led the way as the Fort Collins Municipal Railway resumed service from City Park on the west to Lindenmeyer Lake in the north and south to Pitkin Street. Fort Collins was the smallest city in America to have its own streetcar system, and the Birnies were so popular that the residents affirmed their support with referendums in 1932, 1934, 1938, and 1950.
We became very well acquainted with the conductors, of course, because that was our daily transportation. And they knew us so well. In fact, we lived right on the corner where the streetcar stopped. But we could just about time them just right. So we know we only had 2 minutes to put our coat on and run out the door, and we could be in the streetcar, ready to go to school. If we'd happened to forget our coin, we could buy so many coins for a week, couldn't we? A week's supply. Or if we happened to forget it, we'd just tell the gentleman, "Oh dear, I'll have to run back and get my coin, I forgot it." "Oh," he'd say, "sit down." And he'd just forget it,
It came down College Avenue to Pitkin, and then 1 block east to Remington, and then up Remington to Edwards, and then from Edwards over to Whitby. And we lived in the 400 block. 404 Edwards was the house. The streetcar would stop almost right out in front of us. They had a 20-minute run one car went one way, and then when they got downtown, why, then they would come back the other way.
Actually, I didn't ride the trolley a whole lot, except we went out to the city park. We lived on the east side of town. And in those days, most people walked where they wanted to go. In fact, my family didn't have an automobile until after the Second World War. So our riding the trolley was pretty much limited to when we would go out to the city park. And in the summertime, as kids, we were only 8, 9, 10 years old, we would go out to swim in the lake. They didn't have a swimming pool in those days. You had to swim in the lake. And we'd ride the trolley out to go swimming. And then in the wintertime, we would take a gunny sack and put some coal and wood in and ride the trolley out and go ice skating on the lake. In those days, just about all the homes were heated by coal or wood, so it was sort of fun to go out there both in the winter and summertime.
The fun part was we could jump onto the streetcar, and the seats, you could turn them so that 4 could face one another, turn the seat back, and that way we could visit, and also we were pretty good about dragging out our books and doing our schoolwork if we didn't get it all finished. Some of us girls got the habit of hopping on the streetcar, and that was our time to sit down and finish combing our hair and get primping just before we got to the school.
Is that right?
And one thing that I did that I was so guilty, felt guilty about later, but our mother didn't wear makeup at all, so therefore she didn't think I should, and we just kind of frowned down on the idea of the girls who did really overdid it then. And so I had a tube of lipstick in my purse, and we all did. We'd wait till we got on the streetcar, and then we'd put our lipstick on.
I remember one time my cousins and I, was 3 cousins and myself, we went out to the city park lake, and we decided to ride the trolley back, and 2 of my cousins got on the trolley, and we looked in our pockets, and we didn't have any money. So we had to walk home from City Park to Smith Street. And what's funny is we beat them home, because the trolley had to go down mountain and then go south on College way out to the old Fort Collins High School and back down to Webby Street. And so we walked home quicker than they rode the trolley. And that was I thought it was a little funny incident. But I was told about the greasing the tracks on that incline on South College from in front of the CSU Fieldhouse and gymnasium. The trolley would go south up that little incline, and some people would grease the tracks, would make it difficult for the trolley to go up.
The thing I recall, especially in the wintertime, we'd get some pretty deep snows and be very icy, and then they didn't clear the streets and treat them like they do now, so cars were just literally stopped in front of their homes for a week or more before they could even drive it to town. But we could depend upon the good old galloping goose, we called it.
Oh yeah, they always sent the work car out to plow. They had one car rigged as a work car, you know, a little shop and everything inside. Had a big snow plow in the front, and they would go all around town. Now the term trolley comes from the little wheel that ran the electrical wire. So at night, when we lived out there on West Oak, we kids would hide in the bushes, and when the streetcar came by, we'd run up there and grab the rope, pull. Of course, the streetcar would stop, and the conductor would have to get out, put it back in, and he'd go about 10 feet, and we'd pull it again, and they finally just disconnected the rope. Had a long pole that they was able to put the trolley up, and we couldn't take it down, so that spoiled our little prank there.
And usually most of the trolley pulling, I think, was done around Halloween, because parents were pretty strict about, they didn't like people to pull the trolley, but it happened. But I think more so around Halloween. And one of the favorite tricks was to take a clothesline and stretch it across the street from one tree to the other, just below the trolley electric line, and then every time the trolley would go by, it would trip the arm. And of course, the drivers of the little streetcar didn't appreciate that at all.
Oh yeah, we .22 caliber bullets and lay them on the track. We know that the streetcar would be coming, so we laid them about a foot apart, you know. And when the streetcar come down, it would sound like a machine gun, you know. See, the streetcars were built so that each end, you could take the controls and switch them back and forth without having to turn the streetcar around somewhere. So when the streetcar was coming down out of town past the college, down where the old gymnasium was, all those football players would get in there and they would start this rocking up and down. See, and it's sitting on two wheels and springs, and they actually made it jump up and down and jump the tracks. One very important person to make that thing work, what's his name that did the track maintenance, old man?
The track maintenance?
Remember him?
I can just see him, but I can't think of his name.
Purdue.
Oh, you're right. Purdue.
Old man Purdue. He had a broom with a curved blade on it and a bucket of oil and a brush, and he would get on the streetcars and he would stop at every curve and every intersection and get out, and he'd wipe the rails in the inside of the flange with oil and take his scoop and he would clean out around the switches and everything and sweep it all aside. And when he got done, well, he'd catch the next one that came by and he'd go to the next corner and get off and do his work.
And of course, everybody knows it was called the galloping goose because it would gallop along. And we were talking about the colors of the trolley. You probably know more about the colors now, I forgot. But they weren't green and gold. I was thinking they were silver and red.
Fort Collins operated its small but quality system until 1951. By then, private autos had replaced the need for a public system, and the city had grown beyond the reach of its 6-mile line. The cars were in need of upgrading that the city did not want to invest. After running the system for 4 years in the red, the end came on June 30th, 1951. Car 22 was the last car to run on the line. Fort Collins has the distinction of running the last regularly scheduled single-truck Birnies in the USA. Much of the tracks were torn up or paved over by 1952. Car 21, the first Birnie car to operate, was towed from the car barn to the Pioneer Museum, which is now the Fort Collins Public Library, in February of 1953. There it was put on a short piece of track for display. For 25 years it sat there, giving in to the elements, almost forgotten.
Yeah, they hooked it up to a truck and just hauled it over there.
Yeah.
And actually, the picture of it almost makes it look like it's being hauled on the tracks, but I don't think it is.
I think I was 9th, 10th grade or something like that. And of course, at that age, I really didn't ride the trolley. I walked to high school, walked to junior high. But one thing I do remember is it seemed like every year or whenever the vote came up, the citizens knew that it was costing the city money to run the trolley, but they still wanted it. And I think it was finally the city council or the mayor decided that we're going to go ahead and just stop the running of the trolley. But I think the majority of the Fort Collins citizens enjoyed seeing the streetcar run on the streets. I wasn't there when they took it there, but I remember when it was there, because where we lived on the east side of Fort Collins, to get to town, we always had to go right to the center of the library park. So it was sort of sad to see it there. You know, it deteriorated, and got to give a lot of credit to those who, restored it and brought it back.
Well, I'd like to ride the trolley once again. There's a memory running gentle through my mind. It's the trolley in Fort Collins, Colorado, where my mama and her brothers.
From
used to
1953 to
ride.
1977 was the dark years for Car 21. It sat derelict with only the rarest hint of its past service and greatness. Its windows were boarded up, and the metal was allowed to rust and deteriorate. The wood rotted, and the grandeur of Car 21 went the way of many other municipal servants, neglected and forgotten.
Well, first of all, the cars, when they stopped running the system, and this was another, I think another piece of it that really doesn't get talked about, is the cars were really in really bad condition, and they were just lacking in maintenance, and had been painted that horrible black, red, and gray color, and so it wasn't like they took this pristine car and put it over alongside of the museum, but all that protected it was inside of a chain link fence, so it was just like you could look through the fence. But over the years the roof began to leak, and it really was in bad shape, and sometime in the, I guess it would have been maybe the early 70s, one of the clubs here in town that Jack Forney was involved with went in, and they redid the seats and just did kind of some cosmetic fix-up on it. And then in the mid-1970s, Carol Tunner and the Junior Women's Club got this, went in and were doing like some cosmetic kind of fix-up on it, and we're finding all these things that were wrong with it. And then they won some kind of a prize, and they put that money into it. But out of that then evolved that idea in 1977 that the car could be restored. The other problem was that if it was restored, what would happen to it? And the initial proposal was they'd fix it all up. I mean, they weren't going to restore it to operate. They were going to just do a nice restoration of the car itself, and then this is when they were trying to kind of revive the Old Town area, and they were talking about right there by the Avery block to put it, kind of extend the sidewalk out into the street, and then put the car there as a static display, and then it could be used as like a little place people could go sit on there and rest, and they could sell tickets from there, and it would be kind of a information booth and so on.
Yeah, well, the project started as a result of winning $500 in a Business for Beauty contest in 1976. I'd been chairman of the contest for the Junior Women's Club, which is now the Junior League. We won $500, and I needed to spend it someplace. I wanted to see it spent downtown. At that time, the city was doing the downtown redevelopment of the medians and the corners and the planters, and the bubbles, overhead bubbles on the corners, which are gone now. But I went to talk to the director of that project, and he said, "Oh, $500. Well, he says, "Why don't you fix up that old trolley over in I says, "What old trolley?" He says, "Well, in Library Park." And, he said, "Somebody over at Edall Landscape Architecture Firm had suggested, why don't they take that trolley and put it downtown on the corner and make it a visitors information center for ticket sales?" And so I said, "Well, that sounds like a great idea." I'd lived here 6 years, didn't even know there was a trolley in the park. So it was kind of an interesting project to start with.
Carol had put an ad in the paper. Actually, it was an article about how they had determined that the Junior Women's Club was going to, as a project, restore the car that was sitting in City Park. And I'd seen it. I hadn't paid much attention to it. And I read this article, and I decided, gee, I could help, it would be interesting. And I did that. Came down on a day, she said, I think I did call her, I don't remember calling her. And she's, and Al Kilminster had also showed an interest. Al Kilminster was the photographer for the veterinary hospital for many years. And he was a narrow gauge railroad specialist, but he was interested in railroads and had a lot of miscellaneous skills like I developed. And so we were the two that showed up.
Went over to look at it in the middle of 1977, and the late Charlene Tresner took me over and she said, if you're going to do this, you ought to take a look at it. And I thought, oh, well, here it is, you know. Holes in the roof, holes in the floor, busted windows. It was kind of a mess, but I was too inexperienced to know what I was getting myself into. In the fall of '77 is when we really started moving toward it. I got a whole lot of newspaper clippings on it and things. So I have a stack of newspapers, a little trolley that could, or galloping goose to gallop again, a number of neat things that the newspapers did with it. I got a call from Roger Smith. Roger said, I'm a model trolley builder. He said, I'm a cabinet maker, an artist, a graphic artist. But by trade, I'm a civil engineer. He has a doctorate in civil engineering. I was very impressed. He said, well, I'll help you with it. And we found out the next week we could make arrangements that we would both go to Detroit and see the one in the Detroit Museum, and we did. Went all through and all over that car there, and that really got us enthused for it.
So we spent ultimately the next 7 years restoring the car. We started out, Al and I would come down on Saturday morning and do a bit of work. This is after the car got moved into the old car barn. You know, she probably told you how we got this moving company to get it lifted up, put it on a flatbed and take it down to the old car barn and roll it in. And so we started working on it, first of all trying to figure out what needed to be done and how we were going to document the parts as we took them apart and so on, and asking for more volunteers to come down. Some people did, and we did get some help taking it apart. We didn't find it nearly as much help putting it back together.
And it was shortly after that then that some people looked at it and said, you know, it could be restored so it could run again. And we could put back in some of the track, and shortly after that then it was, that's when the time when they were moving from the old, building the new library, and they were moving from the old library to the new library, and then the museum was moving into the old library, and the old museum got torn down, and so it was moved over to the present day museum in the old Carnegie Library. And that's when the idea came, well, let's take it to the trolley barn and we can round up volunteers and start restoring it, and we probably can restore it to operation.
In the January, I think it was January of 1978, we managed to get the car into the trolley barn, the old trolley barn, and at that point the guys started taking it apart. My job was a gopher.
Yeah, it probably took probably over the period of 2 years to actually get it apart. Part of the problem was, not to make fun of Carol, but we had to do a lot of explaining to her to convince her that just a coat of paint was more than was needed. We had to show her how the wood was rotted, we had to show her how the metal was rusted and really needed to be taken apart. And she for a while drew the line on replacing the floor. She said, well, the floor's not nice, but can't we avoid that, you know? And so we left it for a while, and the more we began to rebuild and make it look like new, the more the floor began to look bad. And so finally we, was our last fight, I guess, we convinced her that the floor needed to be replaced, and so we took that out. She tells the story about how she came down and it was already halfway undone, but I don't know that it was that confrontational, but we actually did put the floor off until near the last, because we sort of hoped we could avoid putting it in, but it turned out that wasn't as big a job as some of the other things that we had to do.
We didn't know if we could do it, but we were too inexperienced to say, well, we can't. We just barged ahead and look what we've got to show for it. Now, another question would be, how did we figure out how to put this thing, how to do this, how to restore it? Well, it wasn't easy. In the beginning, we wrote and we called all the other trolley museums trying to get plans. Anybody got plans for how to do this? And nobody did. They didn't send us anything or respond, and we were kind of on our own. But finally, someone from the Illinois Railway Museum called us, a man named Frank Saranac, and he said, well, you need Birnie's book, Cox's book of Birnie Cars. And we got a hold of that. He sent us a copy of that. We went through it, and it kept referring to the American Streetcar Journal. So our chief mechanic on this, who's gone now, Al Kilminster, this project wouldn't exist without him. He was a single guy, and he spent all of his hours down here working on this car night and day for 24 hours a day almost, it seemed like, so much of the time. Certainly all his weekends. And he started looking for the American Streetcar Journal, went over to the CSU library, and he found all of the journals in the basement of the library. So he went through, and article by article, he found big pictures like this of the air brake and safety car control equipment, and he blew them up to this size and photographed them. He was a professional photographer himself. He was a photographer for the vet school. And that's why we have such a wonderful photo record of the trolley all the way through. But Al was just incredible, Al Kilminster, and that's how we learned how to put it back together. The other thing is for all the woodwork. Roger Smith would take a rotted piece of wood off, and believe me, he did. This car was down to the bare bones. As I like to tell people, they took every stick of wood off of this car until it was nothing but a metal shell of metal sides with posts around the top and across the floor, beams across the floor. And when it was down to that shell, and then as he took a piece off, he remade it and used the piece he took off as a pattern, and that's how we did it. Another thing in the early days that in order to fundraise, I was the fundraising chairman, the gopher. Carol, go get a bunch of, we need some nails and screws and bolts, go to CD Fasteners and see if they'll give us some. And Roger did some pictures of the trolley. He did a pen and ink sketch, which was absolutely beautiful. We gave these away to $100 donations of money or materials. So that was one of the early fundraising things. I did whatever was necessary. I was the fundraising chairman, I was the gopher, I was the secretary for the board. I incorporated the Fort Collins Municipal Railway Society, incorporated with the Secretary of State, and just whatever was needed.
Electric Railway Journal that was published when electric railways were quite popular. It's quite a valuable resource for articles on how to repair this and how to fix that and things like that for companies in all the cities that ran streetcars. And there were some copies, I think, in the CSU library, but he also went and got them one by one on library loan from Denver, where they had them on file, and he would copy the relevant articles, and we still have those. It's quite a nice collection. It was December. It was actually very dramatic in a way. It was just a few days before we had to demonstrate to the city that we were able to run a streetcar on the line we'd built. We built the line down to, from here, from the barn down to City Park, where we load now, and actually only a small part of that, which is on Roosevelt, do we actually use in service now. But this was the first phase of the line, and we needed to demonstrate to the city that we could do what we had been saying we were doing for, well, 6 or 7 years. And Al and I were working in the winter in this unheated barn, and getting all the last pieces going, getting the compressor governor where it would work at the right pressures and so on, getting it all installed, and getting all the wiring. And although Al did more of the wiring than I did, much more, he was, I guess you'd say, a little reluctant to actually try it, although we tested it. We had a temporary power supply, and we had been to other museums over the years and learned basically how to run a car. It wasn't that difficult. Of course, we knew how because we put the thing together. And so at one momentous occasion, we fired up the power supply and connected it and turned it to the first notch, and sure enough it ran. So we were actually it ran the right direction. We were happy that it ran in the right direction because you've got controls at both ends, and we weren't absolutely sure that everything was right. So, well, there was an interesting story before that. Actually, it's even more dramatic than what I've just described, because we had let's say an over-enthusiastic president of our group at that point. After we'd proven that it would go and basically gone home to get some rest, he came down and, over Al's objection, wanted to get in the car and take it for its first run. Well, he got down there and didn't really know what he was doing, and blew out our power supply. And there we were about 12 hours before we were supposed to demonstrate it with the power supply blown out. And some of us got, actually it was very dramatic because we got on the phone. I had basically given up, said, you know, we've cooked our goose. But some of us got on the phone and did some calling and actually got some new parts for the power supply flown in express, and actually got the thing going in time for noon the next day when we were to run it. So it was really nip and tuck to get that thing fixed so we could run it.
Yeah, and that's when we created the Fort Collins Municipal Railway Society, and then once we proposed putting track back on Mountain Avenue and running it, then of course there was the opposition that came up, and people said, oh, we don't want a noisy trolley running down our street, and you know, it's going to disturb our quiet way of life, because Mountain's a nice quiet residential street. And we had I think, you know, there was even a petition that was circulated that said they're going to cut down all the trees in the median, and they were telling people, and I actually had a lady call me up, and she said, well, what do you think about that proposal to put the trolley back on Mountain Avenue? She says, I'm really opposed to it. And she said, I'm opposed to that idea. And I said, well, now why are you opposed to it? And she says, well, they tell me you're going to cut down all those trees in the median down Mountain Avenue. And I said, no, we're going to move probably about 63 of them and replant them, probably most of them in the median. She said, oh, that's not what they told me. So there was this rather rabid opposition to it. They originally sued us in federal court, and the federal court said, no, this isn't anything we will even consider, so they threw it out. So they went to state district court, and yeah, we actually did go through a trial. And
Car 21 goes through its maintenance twice a year, the first in the beginning of its season in May, and then again midway through its season. All moving parts are checked and oiled. The brakes are tightened. The trolley, which is what makes contact with the power line, is also checked to make sure it spins correctly.
There's a wheelbarrow here. Okay, now the bearings on this car you think would go all the way around the axle, but they don't. They only sit on the top fourth of the axle. Underneath this axle is a bunch of wool waste that's soaked with oil. That wool waste wicks itself up onto the bottom of the axle, and that gets carried up over the top of the axle and underneath the bearing, and that is what keeps the bearing lubricated. And in these, we have to add oil twice a year to the bearings here to make sure they're properly lubricated. If that wicking doesn't wick up properly, the bearing will overheat and we'll have smoke coming out of the journal in short order.
Today you can ride Car 21 beginning in City Park and traveling into history as it goes down Mountain Avenue to the Avery House and back again. The cost? $1 for adults and 50 cents for kids. The trolley runs on Saturdays and Sundays from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. as well as most holidays. The trolley is also available for hire during the week where tourists and groups can go for a ride. It's a great way to spend your day. The trolley is a great way to see, hear, and ride a great piece of history. Many people support Car 21, including Ben McGuire, who is a local musician. He even wrote a song about the trolley. Car 21 has even had a few familiar faces ride it. People can volunteer as a motorman or a conductor. If not, you can come and just take a ride.
One item we're really proud of is that Car 21 is a single owner car. It was delivered to the city of Fort Collins in May of 1919, and it's been in the ownership of the city ever since. The we I refer to is the Fort Collins Municipal Railway Society. The society was founded in 1980 as the organization that would operate and maintain Car 21. We operate under an agreement with the city of Fort Collins. By the time the society was founded, restoration was already a couple of years underway. The society numbers about 200 members total. Of the 200, 30 members really are the volunteer corps that work in teams of 2 and as motorman and conductor on the weekend shifts. In addition to those crews, we've got a very small but talented and dedicated crew of volunteers that maintain the car, the motors, the brakes, the track, the overhead line, every aspect of the car, and it's truly an excellent restoration, very well maintained.
We use it as a special treat for our grandkids who come from Montana to visit and spend time with us. They think it's the greatest little car in the world, and we've driven up and down with them, and of course then you go to Walrus for ice cream, but the two go together, the trolley, and it's just one of those nice things that Fort Collins has, and it wouldn't be possible if we didn't have all the volunteers. Unfortunately, there's just not enough volunteers to keep things like this going. I wish there was an opportunity for more people to get involved, more people who love old trains and love old trolleys. I'd love to see a trolley going all the way around the downtown area, and I'd like to see one, even if it had wheels, going around other parts of the city, because it's such a nice, friendly kind of thing to do.
Well, that's up in the air right now because there is the remote possibility that the Burlington Northern would be moved out of town to a bypass. Then that track would become available. The city presumably would buy it, maybe if it were, that is, if it were for sale. It's not impossible that this car could run in an extended route that might include that rail. But if the Burlington Northern were gone, we could cross that line as well and go into Old Town, and that's one of the visions that we have. The city's talking about other visions of having streetcars going between the city and the campus. That's a long-term plan. So there's lots of remote possibilities. There's nothing immediate because of actually the limitations of going across the Burlington Northern. But we do think that in the future we will be going down to probably down North Howes and have access to the old car barn, which has been talked about as a possible transportation museum, which would include a display of this car when it's not running, some old fire engines from a group that's restoring fire engines, other things that have to do with transportation history.
Well, I'd like to ride the trolley once again. There's a memory running gentle through my mind. It's a trolley in Fort Collins, Colorado, where my mama and her brothers used to ride. Give a token to the driver and get seated. For a nickel's all it took, and we could ride all the way from City Park on east to Whitby to my grandma's house with my brother by my side. Well, they call her the Galloping Goose, I don't know why, 'cause she seemed to rock so smooth along the line. I can still feel the wheels a-clicking neath the floorboard. I can smell the wire sparking overhead. Take a ride back in time, ride the trolley to a gentle time like none you've ever had. Come along, ride the trolley. Come along, make a memory. Get on board, ride the trolley. You can ride